Matthew chapter 12 and verse 15. Aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place. A large crowd followed him, and he healed all who were ill. He warned them not to tell others about him. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Here is my servant, whom I have chosen, the one I love and whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smouldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through to victory. In his name the nations will put their hope. This is the word of God. So you've got a Bible, just keep it open. That's what we're going to be thinking about this morning. Let me ask you just a couple of questions to start with. How long can you hold your breath for? How long a number can you remember? 7 digits? 9 digits? 11 digits? Okay, here's the really important question. How long can you think about Jesus? You manage a minute? Manage a bit longer? It's important because whatever is kind of shaping our thinking, whatever is arousing our affections, that's the thing that will control your behavior. How long can you think about Jesus? The invitation that comes to us from our screens all around us is to become like those who appear to enjoy the same foods, experience the same sexual experiences. Do you want to enter into the fun of their lives? Screens. Or maybe it's the culture that is around us that's more about money, maybe violence, maybe medicate yourself. Whatever's got our attention is the thing that will shape our behavior. You can sum up the life of a Christian. So if you're a Christian this morning, this is what you're meant to be. The word that kind of shapes it is the word sanctification. Now, it's a big word and it's kind of complicated, but I'll give you a very simple definition of it. It's to become like Jesus. That's the job. That's what it means to be a Christian. Become like Jesus. Now, probably the best way to hear that kind of invitation of verse 18. You got a Bible there? If you've got an NIV, it says, "Here is my servant." It's a bit bland. What it is really doing is saying, "Behold, look, see my servant." Now, if you've been with us over the last few weeks as we've gone through Matthew's Gospel, when we got to the end of chapter 11, Jesus spoke about the very intimate relationship that he had with the Father and the Son. Okay. That's where you get at the end of chapter 11. Now, it's no surprise when fathers want us to see their sons, right? Okay. Imagine Rupert Murdoch. He goes, "Hey, see my son Lachlan, CEO of Sky. What a success story," right? You get the idea. Or King Charles. "See my son William. What a success story." It would be very surprising if you heard King Charles say, "See my cleaner." Wow. See my cleaner. Now you come to Matthew chapter 12, and we listen to the Lord speak. And he doesn't say, hey, see my son. He says, see my servant. See the word? Now, the son is the servant, yeah, but he's not asking you to watch his successes. He's asking you to observe his menial, exhausting, unappreciated work in this little section. Hey, behold my servant. And we're being invited today, and it's great you're here, and I hope this will be helpful to you. It's inviting us just to take a great look at Jesus. Behold my servant. Get it in your head. Let this be the stuff that you think about, because this is what will shape your life for good. So I've got 4 little words today. I know I'm watching the clock. It's okay. But I don't know that that's going to make any difference. You're going to get it anyway. So, 4 words to describe Jesus. First word, running. There's a little verse in the Psalms, Psalm 119, it says, I run in the path of your commands because you've set my heart free. And this servant is running. He's not lounging. He doesn't have to be told what to do. He's not trying to avoid the tough stuff. He's just giving it his best shot. He's running. He will proclaim, and this is what he's engaged in. He will proclaim justice to the nations, or the other word you can use is Gentiles. So you have lots of ways of thinking about the world, but as far as the Bible is concerned, the world is very simple. There's the nation of Israel that knows about the true God, and there's the Gentiles who don't have a clue. But the Gentiles are in God's plans, right? From day one. God says to Abraham that he'll make his offspring a blessing to the nations. Now, what's the problem with the nations? What's the difficulty they have? The answer is that they've been told that if they bring their sacrifices, if they give this and that, then the gods will make their fields grow, and they'll make their wives fertile, and they'll make their lives prosperous. That's what the nations have been told. Bring your sacrifices, do your religious duties, and the stuff will be sent. But you need to watch. These gods are a bit capricious, they're a bit fickle. Sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're not happy. So you need to keep them happy by giving them lots of stuff. That's the nations. That's where they live. That's the world they live in. And that is so because they have been lied to. Satan has kept the nations in the dark about the true and living God. The servant comes to bring justice to the nations. God has committed the work of witnessing to the Gentiles, to the nations, to the nation of Israel. But Israel's not interested in witnessing to the nations. And you can understand why. Because the nations are their enemies. They are the oppressors. Roman Gentiles walk about their streets as the occupying force. The governor who rules them is a Roman Gentile. The taxes they pay are Gentile taxes. You can understand why they don't want to be bothered with the nation. That in their minds, justice for the nations would be to kick the lot of them out and give them what they deserve. Now, if you know anything about Matthew's Gospel, you know that the priority of Matthew's Gospel are the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So in chapter 10, Jesus sends his disciples out and he says, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel and go nowhere amongst the Gentiles. If you've got a Bible in front of you, just turn on to chapter 15. We're going to go on 2 chapters. And verse 21 there. So what it says at the start of verse 21, it says that Jesus left that place and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. He goes to the Gentiles. He's in Gentile territory. A Canaanite woman comes to him, and she asks him to heal her daughter, who is possessed by a demon. And she cries out, heal my daughter, heal my daughter. And it just becomes so overwhelming. The disciples say to Jesus, hey, get rid of her. And Jesus says to his followers, I have only been sent, verse 24, to the lost sheep of Israel. But the woman won't give up, and she pursues him. He says to her, it wouldn't be right for me to give the children's bread to their dogs. And she replies, but at least the dogs get the crumbs under the table. And Jesus says, for that remark, for your faith, your daughter will be healed. Now what Jesus is saying to her is, my priority is Israel. That's the top of my things to do list. But I'll give you a few crumbs. Now here's the question. Is getting a few crumbs justice? So justice. Now read on what happens next. So he's still in Gentile territory, and a great crowd come to him. Now does he say to these guys who bring their sick and they lay them at his feet, does he say, hey, I ain't got time for this. I got to be back in Israel? Well, no, if you look at the scripture, you'll see he spends 3 days with them. He's out in the open. He's living out in the open for 3 days. They bring their sick. He heals their sick. He feeds 4,000 people with 7 loaves and a few fish. And the catchphrase that comes at the end is, and everyone ate as much as they wanted. They all ate and were satisfied. And if you go back a few chapters into Matthew's Gospel, you'll see that is exactly the same words he spoke that were spoken at the end of Jesus feeding the 5,000. So he feeds 5,000 people who are Jews. He feeds 4,000 people who are Gentiles, and they say exactly the same thing. They don't get crumbs, they get a feast. And you ask yourself this question, what is it that's driving Jesus? It's not his contract. Do you see what it says? It says compassion. He's just gutted for these people. As he looks out on them, he knows they're deceived and lied to. And it's not his first concern. It's not his job, if you can put it to you like that. But he's just so moved by the needs of these people that he gives them a feast. He seeks to bring justice to the Gentiles. Well might the Father say, behold my untiring, over the top, my servant who doesn't seem to know when to stop. Jesus is the servant who doesn't drag his feet, who doesn't watch the clock, who runs to serve the Lord. Now picture it and think about it. Take time to allow that to process through your head and ask yourself if that's what you're like. You call yourself a Christian? Yeah? You running? You running? That's what Jesus is showing us. Okay, second word. Second word is restrained. He will not quarrel or cry out or raise his voice. The next two things are the things he doesn't do. Okay. He doesn't quarrel or cry out or raise his voice in the street, verse 19. If you were with us last week, we're looking at the Pharisees. The Pharisees are aggressive. They're going, your disciples are doing what is unlawful. They're jabbing their fingers at these guys. They're using their power to make people's lives uncomfortable. And then when Jesus exposes the mistaken thinking that's going on in their heads, they determine they're going to use their power to kill him. But Jesus is not like that. He is not aggressive. He doesn't quarrel or cry out. And much to the frustration of his disciples, he doesn't raise his voice in the streets. They are dismayed that Jesus will not use his power to destroy his enemies. You know, when they come to arrest him, Peter thinks, hey, it's time, guys, to get the swords out. Jesus says, hey, put your sword away. It's not what I've come to do. And he stands before his accusers, harmless and gentle and silent. He's like a lamb. See my servant, God said. See my servant. Indifferent to the rejection of the Jewish nation, disinterested in the verdict of the Gentiles, secure in my judgments. Now, I put it to you that we are fascinated with celebrity. Yeah? Big names, gifted people. Now, I don't think that stops at the church. I think we get pretty fascinated with the big preachers and the authors and the podcasters in the context of the church. Now, I'm not saying I've never been helped by gifted preachers. I don't want you to hear me saying that this morning. But I've been around churches quite a long time. And this is what I have found. That it's not necessarily the people on the platform. It's not necessarily the people who are extremely gifted, who have proved the most helpful to me in my Christian life. But often it's been the little people, the people you wouldn't even pick out in a crowd, who have played the most significant part in my life. I used to have, when I was in Doncaster in the pastoral church there was a guy who would just send me a little email on a Monday morning after he had been to the church on a Sunday, just with a word of encouragement. It wasn't a kind of big long email, but it just had a little word of encouragement. I sometimes think he might have had to search quite hard to find something encouraging to say, but he always came up with something. Great text today, Kenny. I know that there are little old ladies who have said to me, we are praying for you every day. They don't appear on platforms, but they have played maybe the most important part in my life to get me where I am today. Jesus didn't quarrel, cry out, or raise his voice in the street. He wasn't promoting himself in that kind of way. Maybe this is a particular word to the men amongst us. I think as men, we can be the angry party, right? We can aim to overpower others with our words. We're just better at arguing. We can do shouting. Listen to the Bible. I want men everywhere to hold up holy hands in prayer without anger or disputing. Yeah? prayer or quarreling. You like Jesus or the world? Make up your mind. That's what he's like. That's who he is. Right, number 3. Restorer. So here's the second thing he doesn't do. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smouldering wick he will not snuff out. Now, we live in a culture, don't we, that has a kind of industry of rejection, right? So unwanted, unborn babies can be taken care of at the clinic. There are homes for elderly, confused people. There are special hospitals for the mentally ill. There is rehab and residential provision for the addicted. There is a kind of industry around rejection. Now, I quite understand there's real people that stand behind these kind of statements, and the last thing they may want to do is find themselves having to find a care home for their loved one or whatever else might go with it. But they're at the end of their tether, they're just overwhelmed by the whole thing. It just gets too much. Behold my servant. So here's Jesus, and he's engaged, and quite clearly is engaged with the beggars and the lepers and the babies. It's not difficult to recognize them as broken reeds. And he certainly doesn't add to that sense of rejection that they have. He kind of lifts them up from their respective pits. He enables them to re-engage with the world. But the brokenness doesn't end at the poor and the sick. That is not the extent of Jesus' ministry. He's just here for the poor and the sick people. My real problems are not financial and medical problems. Those are not my number one struggles. Marriages, think about this for a second. Marriages don't end because money is tight. They end because someone concludes the person they've married is not what they seem to be, and it's time to move on. They end because people have concluded that the relationship is broken and they're not going to stick around long enough to fix it. Friendships don't fracture because someone gets sick. They come apart because one party reckons their friend has let them down, or perhaps become disloyal. Now, if Jesus and the disciples was a marriage, it was a marriage full of big disappointments. These guys that he had poured his life into for 3 years turn out to be forsakers, deniers, sleepers. And on the very night when Jesus discloses, this is what you are like. Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. You will all run away. Judas, you're going to betray me. On the very night when he tells them that about themselves, John says, the big story over the whole thing is Jesus loved his own who were in the world, and he loved them, wait for it, to the end. That's amazing. Behold my servant who doesn't discard the broken and the apparently useless. Now why is it important to get that in your head about Jesus? You know the people who would say something like this. Have you heard people say something like, I like to think of Jesus as, right? ... Hey, I like to think of Jesus as my co-pilot. Or, I like to think of Jesus as my counselor. You know the kind of stuff. There is no point in having a fantasy version of Jesus in your head. It will not do you any good. You and I need the real Jesus in our heads. Why? Ask yourself this question. Would you have gone to the Pharisees and told them that you have messed up? No, you wouldn't. And of course, there are people like the Pharisees. But you would have gone to Jesus. You could have gone to Jesus and said, you know what? There's a woman who Jesus engages by a well. And he puts his finger right on the problem in her life. She's had 5 husbands. And the amazing thing about that story is that when Jesus says, yeah, you've had 5 husbands, haven't you? And the man you're now living with is not your husband. The amazing thing about that story is she doesn't pick up her water pot at that point and stomp off and say, who does he think he is? Because this is the man who doesn't break bruised reeds, broken people. He doesn't discard them. You can tell him you've had 5 husbands, and he's not going to walk away. Now, just ask yourself this sort of question. Would anybody tell you that they've messed up? Or I'll put the question slightly differently. Are you somebody who could be described as approachable? Because we're not going to go, that's terrible. Right? My question is that what we're like? And my question to you, if you're not a Christian, is, knowing what I've just told you about Jesus, will you go and do business with him? Will you speak to him about these messed up parts of your life? We live in a world where we're just almost, the default setting of our lives is to go, I'm doing fine. I'm okay. Look at me. It's all right. The Bible says that's not true. Speak to Jesus. He will not discard you. Great news. Behold him. Behold him. That's who he is. Here's the last one. He is the revealer. Last words from this little section until he brings justice through to victory. In his name, the nations will put their weight. Now, you and I are being reminded that Jesus is of global significance. He's of cosmic importance. That's what this is telling us about it. He might be in this small location in the Middle East, but his influence and his importance extends to the whole globe. But the strange thing is this. How can you believe in someone who won't raise his voice in the streets, who's committed to the desperate and the broken, and yet he's going to have a global significance? Okay? How do these two things work? From the moment that Jesus is baptized, he's at war. He's involved in this conflict with Satan. The devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. You see that? Hey, look at this, Jesus. It shows him the world. All this, says Satan, I will give you if you will bow down and worship me. Now, I haven't got time to do the whole kind of background to this, but Satan becomes the prince of this world when he turns Adam and Eve into traitors and takes their place. So they're meant to be the prince of this world. And And Satan turns them, and he moves in to their place. And he becomes the prince of this world. And the power of the temptation is, this is exactly what the servant has come to recover. Why has Jesus come? Because Satan is the prince of this world. Because he's in charge of the whole place. And here's Satan offering Jesus the quick and easy route to success. Hey, come and worship me. There, you can have the whole lot. But if Jesus is to expose Satan's lies and rescue the nations from his deception, then he's going to have to go the meek and gentle route. He's going to have to become the lamb that is led to the slaughter, and the sheep before its shearers is silent. And here's why. Satan does his work through lies. 2 lies that he's told us. He said to Adam and Eve, "You will not surely die." Now, what I think he's saying is, look, death is not a problem. Don't you worry about dying. It's not a problem. It's just a little thing. Now, you have to think, he has been remarkably successful in that lie. How many times have you heard people say something like this? Oh, he'll be up there now, watching us, so pleased with what is going on. Really? Is that true? The death of Jesus reveals what death is like. Now, there are aspects to Jesus' death that are unique to him. Yeah, I get that, absolutely. But he's showing you something about death in his death. He's showing you the darkness that goes with it. In 1977, there was a blackout in the city of New York. Now, New York was not unfamiliar with blackouts, but normally it would be confined to one borough, and then they would kind of manage the grid system so that all the lights didn't go. But in 1977, all the lights in the city went out. And in an instant, almost it seemed like an instant, people went from putting their kids to bed, having their tea, getting ready for tomorrow. Whoop! The lights go out, and looters, arsonists, thieves, violence erupts on this city. The place, in a very short time, people are arriving with pickups, looting shops, taking them out. Now, these are not multinational chains we're talking about here. This is not H&M. No. These are little businesses. On one occasion, there's a woman standing outside a shop saying, "Please don't do this because they're good folk." And they just sweep her aside. What's going on here? The restraint has been removed. The restraint of, I'll get caught, I'll get punished, I'll be ashamed. No, not anymore. You can do what you like. You can be yourself. Whoa! The darkness has descended. Now, when you look at Jesus' death, you see what happens. All the sympathy, there is no sympathy. All the encouragement, there's none. The kindness, it's gone. Everything that belongs to the light. And in its place comes hatred, cruelty, pain, and punishment. I heard somebody say once, no, I want to go to hell because that's where all the good parties will be. There will be no parties. There will be no smiles. There'll be no relationship. There'll be no friendship. There'll be nothing good. It is a place of darkness. Jesus is saying to us, do not listen to the lie that says Death. Now, we're not talking about dying here, by the way. He's saying to us, don't listen to the lie that says death is nothing at all. Death is terrible. Absolutely terrible. That's what Jesus shows us. He exposes the lie. Okay. Now here's the second lie. The second lie is that God is oppressive. You do not want to get involved with him. Do you mean he said you're not to eat from any tree in the garden? That's Satan's words, isn't it? What a terrible thing to say. God is made out to be somebody you really don't want anything to do with. Just keep out. He rules with a rod of iron. He'll make your life absolutely miserable. Right? Now, of course, there's plenty of illustrations of oppressive rule. Right? You just look around the world, you can see plenty of expressions of rule that's just awful. And Jesus comes as the king. He comes as the king who will witness to God's reign. But he's not a self-serving king. He's the servant king. He wears a crown of thorns. He sits not on a throne, but on a cross. He comes to serve us and show us. He kind of pulls back the darkness from God's character and says, look what's there. No, he's not mean, he's not disinterested, he's not condemning. He's a giving and unfailingly loving God. Now, let me be clear with you. You either live under the rule of Satan or you live under the rule of King Jesus. There's no two ways, there's no middle way. That's it. The rule of Satan or the rule of Jesus. One or the other, for our lives. And we need to shut our ears, I should say, to Satan's lies that say, this is not for you. Oh, this is not for you. You're not the type. You're too bad. It's too late for the likes of you. No. The first person to benefit from the death of Jesus was a criminal. The first person to recognize Jesus as the Son of God was a Roman centurion, a Gentile. A man who had crashed and burned and denied Jesus was shown that there is a way back into his friendship and relationship. And all these things are saying to us, this is what your God is like. Now, you and I live in a world where there are places where governments and regimes have kind of set up roadblocks so that people do not get to hear about Jesus. Whether it's communism or whether it's Islam, countries that, you just can't go into them proclaiming that you've come to tell people about Jesus. We should be bothered about that. We should care about justice for the nations. It should be in our prayers. It should be part of our giving. We should be thinking about going to these places. They should bother us. Why? Because that's what Jesus is like. Because that's what progress looks like.